Tonight, a guilty plea in a high-profile murder.
The only justice we will have if she can come back, and she will never come back.
She tried to leave her abusive husband. He brutally killed her. We examine the case, shining a stark light on domestic violence.
And I just remember rolling, and then all of a sudden I heard a very hollow bang, and that was my skull impacting the asphalt.
An officer dragged in a routine traffic stop. His search for justice in a CBC News exclusive.
Do you see that as kind of a dry run?
It could be.
From fake news to Twitter trolls, Canada should expect foreign interference in the next election. So will you be able to spot it before you head to the polls? This is The Nation.
2 days before Alana Frick was attacked and killed by her husband, her body dumped into a river near Toronto, she had a plan to get out. She served him with divorce papers. But what happened next was revealed today in new court documents as Mohammed Shamji pleaded guilty to second-degree murder. And the details, all the more stunning when you compare them to how their life appeared on the outside. Two successful doctors, one a surgeon, the other a family physician. They had 3 young kids, but on the inside, that marriage was ugly. Joanna Remiliotis was in court today.
There is so much she wants to say, just not yet. Today, Anna Frick only uttered what any heartbroken parent would.
The only justice we will have if she can come back, and she will never come back.
She is her daughter, Alana Frick, a wife who wanted to leave an abusive marriage, a mother who left 3 traumatized children behind when she tried to.
It's tremendously relieving that it did result in a guilty plea, because they were facing a 6-week trial with the knowledge that a 14-year-old would be forced to testify.
That 14-year-old was just 11 when she woke up at home to the sound of her mother being killed. A devastating end to what appeared to be a storybook marriage of 2 successful doctors. In a brief but chilling summary, today court heard the child woke to sounds of her parents arguing. She heard banging, her mom scream, then silence. The 11-year-old went to her parents' room to investigate and was ordered back to bed by her father. Mohammed Shamji admits to striking his wife multiple times, breaking her neck and ribs and then choking her to death, then packing her body in a suitcase and dumping it in a river north of Toronto. The former neurosurgeon then carried on with his daily routines, including performing surgeries the next day. Horrific details his daughters heard firsthand today.
We thought it was probably best that they not be in the courtroom, but the eldest was fairly adamant that she be. She is the one who gave a full day of testimony at the preliminary inquiry, and she feels very much a part of the process.
The courage it took to do that. Today was the first time the eldest children saw their father since his arrest 2.5 years ago, and heard too how their mother was a victim of repeated abuse, who wanted a divorce but kept giving their father another chance, until she decided to finally end the marriage weeks before she was killed.
Okay, so Joanna, hard to imagine any family going through this, but kids, I mean, how are they doing?
They're heartbroken, and they are incredibly brave, especially the eldest daughters, right? But the little one too, he's only 5, but he still asks for his mom, so it's so sad to hear.
And you mentioned the grandparents and all of this. At the start of the piece, you said, you know, they have a lot that they want to say. Are we actually expecting to hear from them?
Yes, they promised to speak to the media at length at the sentencing hearing once that's over next month. And they do want to take the opportunity to raise awareness about domestic violence. Throughout this last 2.5 years, every court appearance, her funeral, they've been sporting purple ribbons, which are, you know, symbols of domestic violence, because they think it's so important to talk about it. And they will do that next month.
Okay, Joanna, thanks very much.
You're welcome.
This case is a reminder that there is no single type of person who can become a victim of domestic abuse, and reaching out for help can be dangerous. The rate of intimate partner violence was falling until 2014, when it started to creep back up. The most likely targets, 25 to 34 years old. The vast majority of them women. And the abuse could arrive in one explosive incident or be a slow climb to danger.
Emotional abuse, verbal abuse, name calling. It could be controlling access to family and friends.
Goes without saying, getting out safely is nowhere near as simple as walking out the door. Shelters work closely with victims to come up with a safety plan, but there are barriers: fear, poverty, children, and getting out can be dangerous.
We know that that puts her at the greatest risk of experiencing violence and worse.
To make just getting information safer for those who need it, a number of websites about domestic violence have quick exit buttons like these and details on how to cover your online tracks so an abusive partner will never know you were there. Okay, Ian, let's turn now to a CBC News exclusive. The story of an Ontario police officer still looking for accountability after almost being killed.
Andrew, his life and career deeply affected by someone else's reckless decision. Patrick Chatelain is no stranger to risk, first as a paramedic with the Canadian Forces in Afghanistan, and then as an Ontario provincial police officer. During a 2017 traffic stop, he was badly injured. So far, no one has been held legally responsible, and Chatelain still hasn't returned to his regular duties. But now he's speaking exclusively to CBC News about the civil suit he's launched against the people he considers responsible. Katie Nicholson has his story.
A car peels away from a traffic stop. Clinging to its side, OPP officer Patrick Chatelain.
I distinctly remember hearing the engine redlining. It was just so fast, and I could feel the wind on my face, and I've parachuted before, and it was similar to, when you step out of the airplane for the first time, that wind in your face.
The car picks up speed and swerves through the intersection.
All of a sudden, I heard a very hollow bang, almost like when you drop a coconut on the ground, and that was my skull impacting the asphalt.
I have an officer who was performing a traffic stop. Yep. And he was dragged by the vehicle.
Chatelain is usually the person who responds to emergencies like this. He served as a paramedic in Afghanistan, and more than a decade ago, he was dubbed the highway hero. When he came across a horrific crash on the 401, he extinguished a fire and treated the victims.
You can see my body just rolling.
But now, complications from his head trauma linger, keeping him from his regular duties.
I tried to go back to work right away, and over time, the symptoms just became too much. I wasn't able to cope with those injuries.
4 people were in the rental car. Charges were laid against the man whose name appeared on the rental agreement, but they were dropped because the courts couldn't determine who was actually behind the wheel.
It was quite numbing. I know what happened, yet in terms of the eyes of the court, nobody was held accountable.
Chatelain has made accountability his mission. He's suing the rental company, the OPP Vehicles Insurance Company, and the man who rented the car for $4 million.
He was the one that rented the car. It was not reported stolen. And so if it wasn't him, he knows who it was. And so we hope that the truth comes out.
Whatever the outcome of the lawsuit, his story makes one thing clear. This is a dangerous job. Katie Nicholson, CBC News, Mississauga.
Adrian, let's go now from an issue of a search for justice to protecting democracy.
Right, and what happens when there are attempts to exploit Canada's democracy by meddling with the election. Now, there's no doubt cyber threats are all around us and about to get worse. So there's a plan to handle them from all fronts to protect Canada's upcoming election from foreign interference. And make no mistake, that interference is real. It's already started. And to shut down the online hate that's already been poisoning platforms like Facebook. So let's start right there. Today, Facebook wiped and banned a Canadian far-right commentator and several groups from its platform. As Salima Shibji explains, that act is part of a growing pushback against hate.
There's been a rising in the alt-right.
She's been called out for fueling hate. Now Faith Goldie's words have gotten the far-right commentator and failed Toronto mayoral candidate kicked off Facebook and Instagram. Also banned today, a so-called white nationalist and his organization, and several other far-right groups. Facebook says all 6 violate the company's policy on dangerous groups. In a statement, Facebook says there's no place on its platform for individuals and organizations who spread hate, attack, or call for the exclusion of others on the basis of who they are. Goldie had to resort to Twitter to respond.
Because they have proven themselves to be so terrified and so weak.
Attending the same rally as white supremacist Faith Goldie.
News of the ban made it to the House of Commons. The Conservative leader attacked for attending the same rally as Goldie earlier this year.
We will always denounce those who promote hateful ideologies while standing up for energy workers.
Facebook's move comes on the heels of weeks of criticism after the Christchurch shooting was live streamed for all to see.
They wanted people to react.
But at this forum on how to stop online hate, Facebook's decision is met with some skepticism.
They're kind of just the tip of the iceberg. There are several other groups out there, some worse than the ones that were removed today, that still should be removed. But we're cautiously optimistic with this as a first step.
It's a fine line, curbing hate while respecting free speech. Still, the Liberal government is applauding Facebook and hoping others follow suit.
In Canada, when it comes to hate speech, when it comes to inciting violence, those are things that we don't accept out on the street corner. We shouldn't accept them on platforms either.
The minister is also hinting she's open to further regulation so that companies aren't left to police themselves. Something similar perhaps to what the UK is looking at, where social media sites would be forced to pay fines if they don't block hateful propaganda. Salima Shamji, CBC News, Ottawa.
So let's talk about more trouble online. Think specifically of the interference in the U.S. presidential election of 2016. That was unprecedented. Back then, Russian disinformation reached 126 million Facebook users alone. Now, the good news from the CSE, that's Canada's electronic spy agency, we probably aren't facing a threat that big, but the bad news is the threat is real, and it's not just the Russians.
Once actors see certain successes out there, that there will be copycat behaviors.
Now, spies rarely talk in certainties. Predictions are shaded by factors like confidence in sources. But a new CSE report puts the chance of meddling in this year's federal election at about 80%. Olivia Stefanovic explains what that means.
The Communications Security Establishment says that foreign cyber threats targeted half of all advanced democracies holding national elections last year. That's 300% more than just a few years ago. And the target the CSE is most worried about is you.
Canadians are going to have to do their part, and we're all the citizens having to do our part, which is consume information with a critical eye.
The CSE predicts foreign actors will attempt to sway voters before they head to the polls, sowing divisions, trying to shape opinions and behaviors.
There were numerous reports that, Canadians were fighting and being killed by Russians or separatists, basically, in the region who are pro-Russia.
Foreign entities can use fake stories to try to discredit campaigns, platforms, and policies. In 2016 and 2018, false reports about Canadian operations in Ukraine alleged that Canadian soldiers had been killed, and they were seen thousands of times on Facebook, and it can still be found online today. This expert says Iran, Venezuela, and Saudi Arabia also have capabilities. So, can this be stopped? The federal government has set up a task force to warn Canadians of potential interference.
I think the main strategy right now is to prime the population and the media and make them aware that this is something that is likely to happen.
The government is trying to get social media companies to abide by a set of rules, but it's not forcing them to do so. On a positive note, the CSE says Canada's voting system is fairly secure thanks in part to paper ballots. Protecting the perception of voters will be harder. Olivia Stefanovic, CBC News, Ottawa.
CBC has a unit that's watching for election interference. Journalists Roberto Roca and Jeff Yates are part of it, recently pouring through data on thousands of fake accounts that have been dumped by Twitter and the 9 million trolling tweets they had generated, some part of campaigns to divide Canadians. Here's some of what they learned.
We found some indication that there might have been a small-scale influence campaign in 2017 on Canadian social media. So we saw that fake Twitter accounts run out of Iran tried to stoke negative messages about Canadian pipeline projects.
Do you see that as kind of a dry run?
It could be. It could. One analyst I spoke to said that the trolls might just be dipping their feet in the water, testing out, see what works, see what Canadians respond to.
Roca and Yates determined the fake Twitter accounts were repeatedly retweeting real Canadians. In other words, artificially stoking the flames of dissent in this country. And there was a pattern to the fake accounts.
Iran, Russia, and Venezuela seem quite active in talking about Canadian issues. So we came up with at least about 70 keywords that we think are just uniquely Canadian that wouldn't exist anywhere else. And when we filtered the data with those keywords, we came to close to 22,000 tweets.
And the bottom line of what it told you was what?
Was that the two main topics, the two main divisive topics that they think that they could use to divide Canadians are immigration and pipelines.
So that's just a really quick sense of their research, but there's a lot more out there. In the days to come, we'll be taking a closer look at some of the current efforts to chip away at the integrity of Canada's next election and what you can do to guard against that manipulation.
U.S. President Donald Trump's frustration with his southern border appears to be hitting a new high. Over the weekend, he started cleaning house at Homeland Security, ushering out Secretary Kirstjen Nielsen. Now, in her watch, the U.S. implemented some of its most controversial border strategies, like family separations. But they did little to stem the flow of people desperate to reach the country. And now, as Ellen Morrow tells us, Trump wants an even harder line.
Kirstjen Nielsen looked nothing like a woman scorned speaking outside her home this morning.
I just want to thank the president again for the tremendous opportunity to serve this country.
But multiple reports say Nielsen was forced out, that President Trump wanted someone tougher, despite Nielsen being the face of hardline immigration moves, including the separation of thousands of children from their parents in 2018.
If she wasn't extreme enough, it gives me real pause to think about who the president will be looking for to succeed her.
The change in command comes amidst a growing problem. More than 100,000 people were detained at the border in March, the highest monthly total since 2008.
Our country is full. Can't take you anymore. I'm sorry. Can't happen. So turn around. That's the way it is.
And though it's good for riling up the base, the president's tough talk, including his recent threat to close the border completely, has done little to stem the flow.
He's definitely created a lot of anxiety in
This analyst says Trump may actually be fueling the rising numbers.
Immigrants, and particularly families, are hearing this administration's rhetoric. They see their record of start and stop harsh policies along the southern border, and they think, hey, the time is now. If families aren't being separated right now, if the border's still open, we better get there as quickly as possible before the next hammer can come down.
But once those people arrive, they encounter only uncertainty as they wait sometimes years for their asylum claims to be processed.
Nielsen is not the only official parting ways with the administration. The head of the Secret Service is also leaving, and several U.S. media outlets are reporting that more officials could be on their way out as part of a larger overhaul of the country's top immigration and homeland security leadership. Ellen Morrow, CBC News, Washington.
In all, Trump has lost 15 members of his cabinet since he's been in power. According to the Brookings Institution, the turnover rate for senior staffers from the executive office, 66%.
We are live on the Pacific edition of The National following a significant development here in British Columbia in the ongoing fight against money laundering.
It is a startling piece of information, and it's an obviously troubling piece of information.
BC's Attorney General received a new money laundering report a week ago and says it was urgent to release one particular part of it now. It reveals the RCMP team tasked with investigating money laundering is more than 3/4 unstaffed, meaning there are no federal police officers investigating that criminal activity in this province. The RCMP responded tonight saying the report represents only, quote, a snapshot in time and doesn't capture all personnel involved.
I am cautiously optimistic that after over 60 years, we are finally going to get the next pipeline to Tidewater built.
Alberta Premier Rachel Notley on the campaign trail today, saying she expects Ottawa to approve the Trans Mountain pipeline by the end of next month and declared shovels will be in the ground this fall. Work on the pipeline expansion was halted last August following a ruling by the Federal Court of Appeal. The Alberta election is next week, Tuesday.
Ahead tonight on The National, David Saint-Jacques goes where only 3 other Canadian astronauts have gone before.
And a former Hollywood actress pleads guilty in connection to her role in an alleged sex cult with ties to Canada.
And Susan Ormiston is on the ground in Israel on the eve of a high-stakes election.
Here comes Benjamin Netanyahu, absolutely surrounded by security pushing and shoving. We are being shoved pretty aggressively. Whoa!
When news broke of a self-help organization that allegedly doubled as a sex cult, it not only grabbed headlines, but also the attention of the FBI. Well, today, one of NXIVM's most high-profile members pleaded guilty. Briar Stewart explains.
Surrounded by cameras, Allison Mack made her way into a Brooklyn courthouse where she tearfully pleaded guilty to racketeering charges for her role in a sensational case involving a group whose leader has been accused of sex trafficking.
I can't form a rapport with my audience.
That's Keith Raniere, the head of NXIVM, which billed itself as a self-help group. He's explaining his philosophy on acting to Mack, who previously starred in the show Smallville. Her role in NXIVM was much different.
It's the most challenging thing I've ever done because
she was part of its secretive inner sorority, which, according to prosecutors, was part pyramid scheme, part sex cult. It was that segment of NXIVM that was the focus of an FBI investigation and a CBC podcast.
Many of them were branded on their body in a very painful ritual. And then, of course, these allegations that some of those women were being asked to perform free labor and also have these sexual encounters with Keith Raniere.
There's a lot of embarrassment, a lot of regret.
Sarah Edmondson, whose story was told throughout the podcast, set up NXIVM's Vancouver chapter.
It's not okay to carve someone else's initials into someone else's flesh.
But she left the group after being branded.
I'm glad that nobody else is getting into this because
Gabrielle Gendron wasn't part of NXIVM's inner circle, but she did pay thousands to take its courses and knew Mack well.
I'm grateful she took ownership of the wrong choices she made. The choices she made did negatively affect a lot of other people. And I think that must have been hard for her to really grasp that reality.
So much has already been said about NXIVM, but there will be more. 3 of its key players are slated to stand trial at the end of this month, which will give more insight into the group's inner workings. Briar Stewart, CBC News, Vancouver.
Up next on The National, we'll take you to Israel, where voters will decide tomorrow whether Benjamin Netanyahu's time as prime minister is up.
First, though, a Manitoba man's mission to right a wrong nearly 2 decades later.
I always felt guilty about it. I felt horrible that I stole someone's car, accidentally, albeit. So I wanted to let her know after all these years that this really did happen and that she didn't imagine it.
We are live on The National following news that actress Felicity Huffman has agreed to plead guilty in the U.S. college admissions scandal. Prosecutors say the Desperate Housewives star and 12 other parents will admit to taking part in the scheme, which involved inflating test scores and bribing coaches at various U.S. schools. A total of 33 parents were charged, including Full House actress Lori Loughlin and her husband. They haven't yet indicated whether they'll be pleading guilty or fighting the charges. The Canadian Transportation Agency has issued a huge fine, almost $700,000, against Sunwing Airlines. It comes after an investigation into lengthy flight delays, cancellations, and baggage problems that affected hundreds of passengers following last April's ice storms in Toronto and Montreal. The CTA says despite the weather challenges, there is a minimum standard for passengers which Sunwing failed to meet.
Turning now to Israel and a chance for Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu to make history. Should he win tomorrow's election, he will surpass Israel's founding father, David Ben-Gurion, as the country's longest-serving leader. But first, he has to fend off a strong challenge from a political newcomer. The two main contenders worked their crowds to the very end today, and centrist Benny Gantz, a former soldier, is sure giving the right-leaning Netanyahu a run for his money. Opinion polls actually give Gantz a slight lead going into tomorrow's vote. But experts say Netanyahu may have the easier path to forming a coalition government because he's a known quantity with name recognition, a strong economic record, and a history of support from other conservative and religious parties. Our Susan Ormiston is in Jerusalem ahead of this crucial election, talking to everyday citizens about Israel's challenges and its direction. And as she discovered, that country, like so many others, is increasingly divided.
It's all about Bibi. What Israelis call their prime minister stepping out today one more time.
Here comes Benjamin Netanyahu, absolutely surrounded by security, pushing and shoving, media trying to get their pictures of this rare campaign event in a Jerusalem market. We are being shoved pretty aggressively. Whoa!
He is the most recognized political face of Israel, but after more than a decade, he's vulnerable. And the tensions at campaign stop signal this is a very tight race. He's a criminal, the man yells. He's going to prison. Drowned out by ardent supporters. He's our father, our savior, the king of the world. Who else can speak with Putin, with China? Only him. Here, see, he's the king. The choice, according to Netanyahu, is between a strong right or a weak left. But it's much more nuanced. Right after this vote, he faces potential indictment for alleged corruption, which is complicating the big ballot question here. Is Netanyahu's time finally up? These 18 and 19-year-olds have really only known one prime minister. They're enrolled in a Bina gap year program before they go into compulsory military service. And on Tuesday, they'll vote for the first time.
I think we've gotten to a point where we're scared to be hopeful for the future of Israel in a lot of topics.
Why do you blame Netanyahu for that?
Him being a constant through the past decade and where our country has gotten to. In regards to like the Palestinians, people don't talk about peace anymore. They talk about like how to calm things down for now. And that sucks.
I want to have an administration that has hope for peace, that's making strides for that, that is transparent about its strides for that. I want to see the hate cease on all fronts. I wanted there to be an atmosphere where we can hear each other out. And the current prime minister does not foster that kind of atmosphere.
But the youth vote is not uniform. Many young Israelis are leaning right. For Gilad, security is a key issue.
I don't feel entirely safe. Like, also my brother lives on the border with Gaza, very close, and he has, a lot of times when there's rockets, he has to go somewhere else. So I believe that a new person will bring more security.
In the last 2 weeks, more tanks have moved closer again to Gaza. The prime minister is under pressure for both too little and too much force in a year of protests and retaliation.
Thank you, Mr. President.
He had to cut short his visit with President Trump recently, an election boost because of an attack at home. A rocket struck this home in a residential area well north of Tel Aviv. The strike went directly through a tiled roof into the center of the house where the Wolf family was sleeping.
This is where Sue was when she got hit.
Robert Wolf was roused out of his bed by his son when a siren sounded.
An almighty explosion took place, and I went like this, and my whole home was in the air. The house was in the air. All these tiles that you see everywhere, they were in the air. And for at least 20, 25 seconds, I can't put a timing on it, I was absolutely sure in my mind my whole family were dead. I ran into the mess. I found my wife on the floor, blood all over the place.
She survived with shrapnel wounds, as did his entire family.
I don't want to think about it. It was a night of miracles, really.
He is convinced Hamas fired the rocket randomly.
Why were we hit? Because we're Israelis, because we're Jews, because this is our homeland and there's a lot of people who don't want us here.
So you're going to rebuild here?
Absolutely. Absolutely. There's no question about it.
He won't say how he'll vote in this election, but urges all Israelis to carefully consider their choice.
I will say, I would love to see a change of attitude, a change of action, because we have to change something, because it's not working.
If change comes, Benjamin Gantz will be part of it. He is chasing Netanyahu hard as one of the leaders of a new centrist party, Blue and White, created just in advance of this election. Gantz used to be military chief of staff during Netanyahu's government. Now, polls show the two parties nearly tied with a slight edge to Blue and White. But in the last decade, Israel has moved solidly to the right, and Netanyahu is trying to knit together another right-wing coalition. Now going as far as to promise he would annex Jewish settlements in the occupied West Bank. Watching all this carefully are Palestinians in Gaza. Tensions are rising internally, salaries falling, and few expect Hamas or a new Knesset is ready for a resolution. The night after the rocket attack, the Israeli Defense Force hit what it says were multiple Hamas targets in Gaza, including an apartment block where Jamal Arazi says his brother lived and got out.
Do you think the election in Israel will make any difference here in Gaza?
The only difference can make is to speed up the deterioration of the situation around us. This is the what looks like the plan of the Zionism, the Israelis.
I rap for politics.
Young Palestinians like Mahmoud Salman are growing more desperate.
So do you write a lot?
Yes, I write a lot. I kill all my pressure with a rap.
He raps about politics, social issues, what he feels. At 28, he's never been outside Gaza, wants desperately to leave. He sings, "Give me a visa with no return."
You can't see any good future with any Israeli government. I can't imagine.
If Likud triumphs again, Netanyahu could become Israel's longest-serving prime minister. And for Gabriel Libjou, a Canadian Israeli, that's just fine.
Everybody's here to support Bibi. All Jerusalem, maybe not Tel Aviv, but Jerusalem, we're all for Bibi because he's the real man. He's the real man. There's nothing about it, no doubt about it.
But Bibi would have to convince a coalition of smaller parties, and Israel is always primed for election surprises. Susan Ormiston, CBC News, Jerusalem.
And be sure to join us tomorrow night. Susan Ormiston will be live from Israel to discuss election results and what they mean for the country going forward.
Up next on The National, we'll take you to a street corner in Detroit for a look at how technology is making it safer.
This particular intersection also has a camera right up there. Has a full 360-degree view of the intersection, and it lets traffic planners count cars, bikes, pedestrians, and the flow of traffic using artificial intelligence, or AI.
But does all that data come at a cost to your privacy? We'll dive into that next.
But before we go there, let's take a look at the International Space Station, where Canadian astronaut David Saint-Jacques took his first spacewalk today.
Spacewalk has officially begun as the astronauts have switched their suits to battery power.
Saint-Jacques came out feet first after American astronaut Anne McClain. They spent the first few minutes tethering themselves to the station and checking their suits.
Okay, check on hand. Green light is on.
Now put yourself in their space boots. 6.5 hours straight out there. No breaks, no gravity. The team worked on the station's power and communication systems. One major task was connecting jumper cables for backup power to the Canadarm2. As they finished up, Saint-Jacques called the international effort an excellent example of collaboration.
when we manage to look beyond our differences, we achieve things that seem impossible. That's how we progress. Thanks, everybody.
Saint-Jacques is just the 4th Canadian astronaut to step outside the ISS.
Canada's territory is vast, varied, and often wild, but most Canadians live and work in urban areas. Our 3 biggest cities are home to more than a third of the population. So the National has been looking at cities from the gleaming new metropolis of tomorrow to familiar streetscapes on the brink of change. Now, so-called smart intersections are a growing urban trend. They can now be found in more than 100 cities around the world, analyzing traffic to make it safer and easier for you to get around. The city of Detroit has joined forces with the Canadian company to smarten up its roadways. Matt Braga shows us how it works.
Unless you're stuck in traffic or waiting to cross the street, you probably don't think much about the humble intersection or the traffic signals that hang overhead. They turn red, they turn green, and you go on your way. But like everything these days, intersections are getting smarter, like this one in the city of Detroit.
Now, this particular intersection also has a camera right up there. Has a full 360-degree view of the intersection, and it lets traffic planners count cars, bikes, pedestrians, and the flow of traffic using artificial intelligence, or AI.
Now, all of this data is helping city planners to move traffic more efficiently and safely. And all of that data is processed and stored in gray boxes like these, which traffic engineers can analyze remotely.
If you look carefully, you can see a camera picture.
Sonny Jacob is head transportation engineer for the city of Detroit.
So we will open one camera location.
He has 50 of these cameras that are smart enough to recognize what's happening in the videos they record, which can be used to save lives or just shed new light on old problems.
One crash happened at this intersection, say like 3 days ago. I can go back in time and watch this signal as well as the vehicle movement to see whether a signal, who made a mistake,
Those cameras are part of a high-tech system that lets the city of Detroit monitor and even control half of its 800 traffic signals remotely. Traffic engineers can see what's happening in real time thanks to an influx of data they didn't have before. The benefits are wide-ranging. City employees receive alerts on their phones when the power goes out at an intersection. And because the system is web-based, it can be monitored anywhere, anytime. The city says they've reduced travel times by more than 30%, and they've been testing other improvements, like automatically extending green lights to accommodate walkers and cyclists, giving transport trucks the right of way to ease congestion, and changing the traffic lights to green for oncoming emergency vehicles. Early results showed emergency response times improved almost 20% simply by ensuring emergency vehicles were given green lights. And the city says they're already able to pinpoint areas where traffic-related deaths and injuries can be reduced. All of this thanks to a Canadian company, Myovision, based in Waterloo, Ontario.
We take an old piece of infrastructure that's maybe been out there for 25 years and we digitize it. So this is a testing lab. It's doing all the same things that the big traffic lights would do at the side of the road. Just allows us to test in a much more confined indoor footprint.
Curtis McBride is Myovision's co-founder and CEO. His company makes the wireless hardware and AI software that goes into those gray boxes. They develop, assemble, and test everything in Waterloo and then ship it to cities like Detroit.
We've never really been able to measure cities in a way that we can improve them, and anything you measure improves. And so we come along, help cities to sort of measure the flow of traffic, always with a view to help them improve safety and congestion.
Naturally, with data collection comes questions about privacy and how much of our civic infrastructure should be under tech company control. Curtis thinks cities should be running the show, not the other way around.
Who governs data? Is it companies or cities? So we always take the view that the city or the province is the owner and steward of the data. We have to balance privacy with the opportunity that technology affords.
Where congestion, safety, and connectivity are concerned, Detroit sees opportunity. They plan to connect all their intersections with Myovision technology by the end of next year.
All right, there is a lot to sort out here. You are talking, Matt, about technology in Detroit, but what are the chances this sort of tech is coming to a Canadian neighborhood?
Yeah, so here in Toronto, they're already using it for a transit-related pilot. It's being used in the city of Milton. There's 100 cities that are actually being used, that are using this technology, not just in Canada, but around the world. What's interesting, though, that to kind of contrast, right, is in Toronto, you also have this other project that people might have heard of, Sidewalk Labs. They're a company that's owned by Google's parent company, Alphabet, and they want to build not just sort of smart infrastructure or put smart technology in the city. They want to build a smart neighborhood from scratch, from the ground up. And so it's an interesting difference in approach, right? Not a lot of cities will be able to just build this stuff from scratch. And so I think what you'll end up seeing is a lot more of this technology being bolted on, retrofitted, kind of in the way we're seeing here with these infrastructure, or these intersections, these traffic signals.
So every time we have this conversation, the red flags go up about privacy. In what way are the privacy concerns different with these cameras than with regular traffic cameras? And forgive me if it's like a blindingly obvious question.
It's not, because from the outside, these cameras look the same, right? What's different is on the back end, right? You have software that performs analysis of this video. It can count all of the cars and the trucks and the bikes that go by. It can essentially annotate these videos and pull data out of these videos that just goes beyond traditional surveillance, beyond a human watching these videos or the video being saved for a few days. And so I don't think we've really, as a society, certainly not in most cities, had discussions about how this technology goes beyond what we currently have, and whether certainly citizens and people living in these cities appreciate that there's a difference and understand the trade-offs, and whether that's something that they are welcoming in their cities.
Okay, always a learning, lots to catch up on. Thank you, Matt. Up next on The National, the first cruise ship of the season arrived in Halifax today, just in time for a snowstorm.
This is the first time I've had my jacket out in 3 years, so I've got hand warmers and that's it.
Lots more reactions from those passengers, the good and the bad, in tonight's moment. But first, in case you missed it, a Manitoba man is coming clean about a secret he's kept for more than 2 decades.
I felt horrible that I stole someone's car accidentally, albeit.
It was the summer of 1998. The Backstreet Boys were climbing the charts, and 17-year-old Kevin Friedman was a lifeguard at a local pool in Winnipeg, and one of his colleagues wanted a Slurpee. Right, those Slurpees. So she offered up her car to Kevin.
She had a light-colored Ford Taurus, which in the mid-1990s was about every second or every third car on the road. I put the key in the ignition and it wouldn't start initially, but I put the seatbelt on and then I tried to start it again and it did start.
The car wasn't broken, it was just the wrong car. So 21 years later, Kevin tweeted his confession, explaining that by the time he had returned the car, its owner had already left the pool, thinking her car had been stolen. But when she returned the next morning with police, the car was back in its spot.
I just want all these years later to let her know that this actually happened.
So if any of this sounds familiar to you, Kevin from Manitoba really wants to hear from you.
The Marina cruise ship docked in Halifax Harbor today, marking the official start to the 2019 season. And they were greeted by a snowfall warning. Not exactly how anyone wants to kick off their vacation, at least a sort of spring-summer vacation. So in typical Canadian fashion, we asked passengers how they felt about the cold and snow heading their way. Their reaction is tonight's moment.
A little nippy, but it's not too bad.
It's freezing. It's really, really cold. But I came prepared. We knew it was going to be cold.
I looked it up on Google to see what the temperature was going to be so we'd know what clothes to bring.
I love it. I love it. We don't get much cold weather, so it feels good, and I'm really enjoying it. It'll be fun to see snow because we've never seen that before. So, yeah, hopefully it'll come down like in the movies.
I'm really cold, but we came from summer in Australia.
I'm a little excited that we're going to be here for snow.
This is the first time I've had my jacket out in 3 years, so.
Spring's coming, isn't it? Spring's coming.
I feel badly for Halifax. I lived there. It's a great city. Middle of April should be really nice. This just underscores the stereotype for all those tourists, right? They expect to see igloos, I'm sure. It shouldn't be this cold.
I just think it's funny that the people that we saw there in that clip, those are the people who were reasonably well prepared, right? I mean, they did have hats and coats and scarves, I think, in one case. But our producer sent us a note saying that some of the Canadians on the cruise noted that not everyone on board that ship seemed as prepared. So,
well, that's why they were staying inside, I would argue. Can we just take a moment to respect the size of this industry for Halifax? That's the first of 190 ships, 320,000 people who are going to be hanging out in Halifax.
A little chilly.
That's the National for April the 8th. Good night.
Good night.
It'll get warmer. Good night.
Sure it will.